this in just a second.
Yep.
Oh yeah, great, John. Lovely to see
everybody.
Yeah. So thanks so much. So John, I'm gonna and Waverly, I'm gonna leave you in the hands of Sive. So Sive is McCarrick, who's has the questions that I've sent on to you. But from my side, just really appreciate the time that you're giving us, and really looking forward to this conversation. So Sive, maybe you're more than welcome to take control.
Great, thanks, Brian. So hi, John and Waverly. It's great to be speaking to you today. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to talk to us. As Brian said, my name is Sive McCarrick. I'm 23 and I'm from Dublin. I've just finished my undergraduate degree in environmental biology at UCD, University College Dublin, and now I'm in the process of kind of deciding what I want to do for the next couple of years. So I've got some pretty big decisions to make over the next couple of weeks. My interests include climate change, gender equality, and breaking down barriers to education. I've worked on these issues in my university, my students' union, as well as in Kenya. So for the benefit of our audience, I'm going to read out a little bit of information about both of our guest speakers. And just before I start, I want to let everyone know that this call is actually being recorded. So if anyone has any issues with that, just let myself, Brian, Quiva, or Sammy know. So our first speaker today is John Goldstein, and John is the head of the Sustainable Finance Group at Goldman Sachs, which is responsible for working across Goldman Sachs to deepen the firm's knowledge and grow its capabilities in relation to inclusive growth and climate transition. He serves as the chair of the Sustainable Finance Steering Group also. John joined Goldman Sachs asset team as a managing director in 2015 through the acquisition of Imprint Capital, which he co-founded in 2007 to help expand the firm's environmental, social, and governance and impact investment capabilities. Previously, John served as a senior managing director at Medley Global Advisors. During that time, he co-founded and served as the executive director of the Medley Institute. Prior to that, John was a management consultant at Anderson Consulting, now known as Accenture. John has also served as an advisor or board member to a diverse set of organizations in the impact space, including groups such as the US National Advisory Board of the G8 Social Impacting Investment Task Force, the Global Impact Investing Network Impact Based Initiative, the Global Social Venture Competition, McKinsey's Working Group on Social Impact Bonds, Global Giving, Sustainable Food Lab, the UN Development Fund, and the International Faith Investment Group, as well as a number of other groups and organizations. John completed a Bachelor of Arts in History and Ethics, Politics and Economics at Yale University. There, he graduated with honors and was awarded both the Richter Fellowship and the Townsend Prize. So we're really delighted to have him here today. And our next guest is Waverly Middleton. Waverly has worked on the Sustainable Finance Group as a Sustainable Finance Group analyst at Goldman Sachs for the past 2 years. And she completed the Bachelor of Arts in International Relations, Global Business with an emphasis in international finance at the University of Southern California. While at the USC, she made the Dean's List and was awarded a presidential scholarship. Alongside college, she was one of 13 sophomore interns selected for a rotational internship program with Deloitte at the US headquarters in New York City. She also worked as a securities summer analyst with Goldman Sachs and worked as an investment intern with the University of Southern California. At USC, she also worked as a football recruiting assistant. And as well as this, I'd also like to welcome our Washington Ireland Forum fellows to the call this evening. It's great to have you here, and we're delighted to see that you're engaging with the topic of climate change. If any of you have any questions for the speakers, please send me a message and I'll try to come to you. And so if it's all right with both of our guest speakers, I'd like to introduce you to a few of the class, just so you don't really feel like you're looking at or talking to a blank screen. We're a very diverse group from across the island of Ireland. Some of us are based in Dublin, Cork, Galway, Belfast, Derry, and even some of us in London and Oxford. Class is also varied in terms of college degrees. We have a number of students of law, business, modern languages, psychology, medicine, and politics, to name but a few. So if Owen, Grace, Jana and Fergal wouldn't mind introducing yourselves in that order, please.
Sure, thanks, Sive. Hi, John. Hi, Waverly. Pleasure to meet you both. My name's Owen. I'm calling from Oxford in the UK, and I've just graduated from University College London with a degree in modern languages in Italian and Spanish. I don't have much of a finance CV, in truth, but my background is in the non-profit space, working in education and migration, and I did spend last summer interning with an education microfinance NGO, which was a fascinating introduction to impact investment as a concept, really. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about Goldman's SFG, and thanks once again for your time.
Great.
Hi, John. Hi, Waverly. Fantastic to talk to you today. My name's Grace, and I'm calling you from Dublin, but I'm from Northern Ireland. I just graduated from Trinity College Dublin with a first-class degree in English literature. I'm super interested in advocacy, education, gender equality, so my finance knowledge is also very limited, but I'm fascinated to hear about the work you're doing, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Hi Waverly, hi John. It's lovely to meet you guys virtually as well as everyone else on the forum. I'm Jana. I'm calling from a very cold day in Dublin. I'm currently in my second year of law at Maynooth University, so I still have a couple of years to go. And my background is mainly in student engagement as well as gender equality. I had interned with the Red Cross a couple of summers ago with Syrian refugees. So clearly not as expansive as an experience that you guys have in finance, but I'm super excited to hear about your advice and your experiences for having come from a very abundant background of knowledge. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you guys today.
Hi John, hi Waverly, and hello everybody on the WIP forum. Thanks a million for talking to us. My name is Fergal, my pronouns are he, him. I'm 22 and I'm from the back end of nowhere in County Monaghan, which you probably don't know of. But I just finished a degree there in actuarial mathematics. I actually graduated top of the class of 2020, so very chuffed with myself. I'm working at the minute with the New York Comptroller's Office, working with data in relation to the households and small businesses and the effects of COVID-19 on them. And then once I finish up in the WIP program, I'm moving on to Irish Life, where I'll be working as a life actuary. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your opinions on impact investing. This is a really big area for me anyway, and I really can't wait to hear what you have to say. So thanks a million.
Great.
Thanks so much, Owen, Jana, Grace and Fergal. So hopefully we'll get some time to get questions off you later on. But now it's over to John and Waverly. Thanks so much for being here again. And I'm going to just start by asking you a couple of questions. And my first question is, what brought you to impact investments in the first place? And more particularly for John, looking back on your career, and Waverly, as a recent graduate, what tips do you have for those of us entering into the working world, and particularly those of us wishing to make a social impact?
Waverly, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I can kick it off. I think for me, initially what drew me to this field of impact investing and sustainable finance broadly was just the idea of using business and capital markets to solve big problems like climate change, gender equality, economic inequality, which is very appealing to me. And I think personally, like if you think about your career, like you dedicate so much time to being in the office, to working. And so I really wanted to be in a field where I could marry like my personal values with my professional values and feel like I'm making a positive impact on the world while also being challenged, like still learning new things, developing analytical skills, etc. And so I'm very fortunate to have found that at SFG. And I think that when I was initially looking at jobs, there weren't necessarily like an abundance of jobs that had those attributes. But I think what's exciting about this moment now is that it's such a growing and expansive. The growth even of our team, which launched, basically this time last year, and just the acceleration of the client engagements that we've had and the interest even internally at Goldman from people that, like when I was interning, no one was familiar with ESG or sustainable finance at all. And so to see just the increase in awareness and interest from clients and people internally at Goldman, and our CEO even, has just been amazing. And I think it's been such an advantage to be at a firm like Goldman that has this massive platform to speak on these issues that are important and really bring it to the forefront of people that weren't necessarily thinking of environmental or social issues as integral to their day-to-day roles of like sales and trading or investing in companies. And so now to kind of see the integration of that into finance has just been amazing. And so I think moving on to like the second part of your question of kind of like career advice, what I would say, one, expanding upon what attracted me to this job is really like this opportunity for growth and learning. And so being in a field that's expanding, growing, there's like so much breadth, and you can really build expertise kind of in whatever sub theme within sustainable finance and ESG that you really want to. But I think what I've found actually in the past, sorry, there's like a train in the background. If there's a lot of interference, I apologize. But I think what I've found in the past year with SFG, or past like 9 months with SFG, is really this ability to be a younger person, junior person, but add value in an area that a lot of senior people at the firm don't really know yet or understand fully. And so I think it's a really unique area where you can add value as a young junior person and really teach something to someone that's like had a 20, 30 plus year career at Goldman. Like there are very few things that I think you can do that for. And so being in sustainable finance, for me, like that's kind of in the past year, one of the things that I've really noticed and loved about the role. On career advice, what I would say is specifically to like sustainable finance, I think it's really important to have like this functional skill set married with sustainability knowledge. So building out expertise. I know like a few people mentioned they don't necessarily understand finance, which like is fine. Whatever you
I don't either.
Yeah, I did not either when I started at Goldman or when I was in college. So which is fine. I think that you learn so much on the job. And so I think that it's also like when I started at Goldman, I wasn't in an impact investing or sustainable finance role. But I think now transitioning to the team, what's been really amazing is our team is kind of like a melting pot of people with different experiences at Goldman that are able to bring that perspective to our team. And it's been really amazing to see because we all kind of approach client engagements in different ways. So I think, you know, you can build upon what you already know and like and marry that with your interest in sustainability, and like that helps you just become so much more valuable and competitive in the job field.
Thanks so much, Waverly. That was a really interesting contribution. I think particularly like for members of the class who are kind of looking for a job that marries their like personal, I suppose, and professional kind of ideals. It was really interesting. Thanks.
I would give one deep warning on that front, which is once you've had the chance to do work that is challenging, but also in your view important, it's very hard to go back. There's a little bit of a one-way door. Once you've had a chance to spend not just your evenings, not just your weekends working on things that you're passionate about, but actually your days, and particularly if you get a chance to do it in places that give you some leverage to have an impact beyond yourself. My big warning is once you've had a taste of that, it's very, very hard to go back to something else, which is, you know, it's both a wonderful thing, but I can say I've been ruined for working in anything other than this for the rest of my days. But if it makes sense, I'll give you a little bit of my journey, which is a bit random, haphazard, and strange, but sort of how I ended up here. Because look, even some of the majors that were discussed didn't exist when I graduated from university, right? You know, this field, this discipline has grown in a way that I certainly never anticipated or imagined. So I graduated from university in 1995, having planned on, you know, having been interested in various efforts to, you know, improve the world, but not really having known what I was going to do. I planned on going to graduate school, but I never quite filled in the application. So I ended up taking a job as a strategy consultant because that didn't sound that particularly different than graduate school, right? You research, you learn, you write lots of things that people may or may not read, and certainly aren't necessarily going to have an impact on anything out in the world. That's what consulting sounded like to me, and learn an awful lot about a lot of different things. Particularly the world of business, which I hadn't frankly known much of anything about in university, where I studied history and philosophy. But I found the same skill set of analyzing problems, bridging different disciplines was tremendously helpful in some of these areas as well. Because I often get asked, like, what should I major in to do this? What should I say? It doesn't matter, right? Learn, go deep, build your knowledge, build your skill set, build your toolkit, build those skills versus any specific thing. So I went and I got introduced to a strange company that sounded completely fictitious called Medley Gold Advisors. They said, we get paid large amounts of money by big investors to tell them what government officials are thinking that might affect markets. Basically a very expensive form of political news, and eventually realized they actually did what they said they did, went and initially worked for, then ran, grew, and sold that business, which was a fascinating chance to learn about a lot of different things. But along the way, how I really got into this was almost an accident, which is the person who had founded the business, a guy named Richard Medley, used to be a partner of George Soros's and had been involved in all sorts of interesting efforts around markets and impact around the world. And partially because of that relationship, lots of people wanted to get to know Richard and spend time with him. And we happened to have a lot of extra office space in New York. And so these groups that came and approached us, we started giving them office space. And so Global Giving, one of the groups mentioned, a whole host of these other groups, started finding folks that were trying to, as a consultant, you try to solve problems around supply chains and, it's not to say they're unimportant, but I might call them somewhat uninspiring problems. Now I started to find people who are trying to solve problems that really mattered, right? Where you had communities that couldn't understand each other in a way that, may resonate on your end, that you had people talking past each other who could actually have tremendous mutual benefit. And the ability to step back, listen, and bridge these disciplines, bridge these perspectives is actually what unlocked value. And so the Medley Institute was really spending years getting to know folks that were trying to solve these important problems. We sold the business at the end of 2005. I sort of unsuccessfully tried to take some time off. And in 2007, the Kellogg Foundation, Google, and a wealthy family all said, can we pay you to help us figure out this whole mission investing thing? And some of that had come out of an outgrowth of the work we did with the Institute, getting involved in all these efforts to use capital to have an impact. And, great institutions, work that was exciting, and my wife at that point was tremendously frustrated having me sulking around the house in my bathrobe all day long. So the idea of going off and doing some things had tremendous appeal to all of my relevant stakeholders. And at that point, though, I had these interesting organizations asking interesting questions, but frankly, I didn't know a tremendous amount about the topic. And so I would bring out Taylor Jordan. So Taylor at the time was Chief Investment Officer of the Rudolph Steiner Foundation. And Taylor had sort of quietly and systematically built a 100% mission-aligned investment portfolio. And he did it in a way that looked surprisingly like investing, right? And this topic of impact investing in ESG, particularly back then had a bit of a reputation of being, the province of well-intentioned people who wore sandals and tie-dyes trying to learn Excel, right? It was not necessarily thought of as having rigor and depth and discipline. And Taylor looked like any other chief investment officer, right? Very sober, very disciplined, very serious. And so I'd bring him out to show this can be done with rigor. And after being trotted out for the third time in a week as the exemplar of good practice, he said, why don't we just do this together? And that's how Imprint Capital started. And it's very funny now, kind of tracing the tape forward, the Goldman acquisition, what I do now, all these people would say, oh, the foresight you all had. It's like, we had no foresight, we had no vision, we had no anticipation. What we had a set of client engagements that seemed fascinating and a desire to do the work. But we had not the sense in the slightest that this field would grow, that our firm would grow, that any of things would unfold. So I find it rather humorous when people will try to, attribute far greater prescience to us than we could conceivably deserve. We really had a chance to go and try to explore these topics, and particularly large U.S. foundations. I love them dearly. They're the world's worst clients to build a small business with. So imagine if any of you have taken business class, if someone said, here's an idea. Let's pick a very sophisticated, demanding, idiosyncratic, entitled set of clients that are very cheap And let's go build out really big engines that take tremendous depth in two very hard to do things. Deep research into how to change and solve persistent problems and systems around people and planet, climate, education, health, and be really good institutional investors. So let's pick these really idiosyncratic, hard to deal with clients, take things that are really hard to do well, and let's try to build a business around that. So it was a terrible idea for a business. But we had a great chance to really learn how to do this work because those foundations, in addition to being very demanding, they also had a lot of expertise that helped us go deep in these impact sectors. And as a parenthetical, what for me has been fascinating is, when we talk about as a firm, our purpose, sustainable economic growth and economic opportunity, underlying that are these two broad pillars of climate transition, inclusive growth, and underlying that are 9 sub-themes. And those 9 sub-themes actually came out of Imprint Capital and a decade of research with these large institutions to go deep into where's the intersection between economic driver and an impact driver in education, in health, in financial inclusion, in clean, sustainable transportation, agriculture, et cetera. So as Imprint grew, we started getting more types of clients, learning more types of things, and eventually we started getting hired by institutions who wanted help navigating this and were getting questions from their clients. And one of those financial institutions was Goldman Sachs, who we met through work we did for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. And at the end of getting to know them, which felt like every other conversation, when we thought they were going to call back and say, yes, we'll sign your contract and become a new client, because they'd said, come do one last teach-in. We're very consensus-driven. Don't mess up, and we'll sign your contract and become a client. So we did that. It went well, and they called back, and they said, the meeting went well. It was well-received, and we have this kind of wacky idea, and curious as to what you might think, but what if we were to buy you? And so this was unexpected, and I won't bore you with the whole process of going through being surprised to confused to curious to all the different stages. Actually, Harvard Business School wrote a nice case study about the acquisition. So if you want all the nauseating detail, or I'm happy to answer any questions about it. But eventually, what was interesting is, step one, we had to decide, are we open to the conversation? And eventually, we determined we were. 2 is, did we want to have a conversation with anybody else? Because this was an increasingly hot topic. We like to say we were a big fish in a puddle. Right? There weren't many people foolish enough to try to decide to actually make a living doing this really, really hard work. And so, there were other folks who would have an interest. We decided not to, because Goldman had a dynamism, a fluidity that seemed essential to doing this new emergent work. This is not a go stick us in a silo and send us off to do our work, right? This is a much more dynamic entrepreneurial endeavor, and Goldman just felt differently. And finally, to make the decision, we kind of got back to first principles. Why did we start Imprint in the first place? 3 reasons. We wanted to move more capital impactfully. 2, we wanted to do it well, so we're creating models of success and proof points and not cautionary tales. And 3, we wanted to find ways to make it accessible and useful to more people. And so we couldn't actually think of a better way than by joining Goldman Sachs. And so that was 2015. Spent 4 years working to build out the sort of ESG and impact business within the asset management division. So Goldman has 4 divisions. That's one of them. So spent time building up effectively, eventually a team of about 50 different people working on that just within that division. I can talk a lot more about the specifics if it's useful, but broadly, as we mobilized, the world got much more focused on this, and so that business grew from a $3 billion business to $6 billion to 11 to 17 to now $75 billion. So that grew, and then as Waverly was saying, back in sort of late 2018, our leadership started to say, look, this is showing up in all of our businesses with all of our clients, and what do we do? And that eventually led to the launch of the Sustainable Finance Group, where the core proposition is in some ways it's a strategic clarity that climate transition and inclusive growth, and hearing a lot of your collective interests and backgrounds touch these sort of people and planet, these 2 broad themes. Those are just broad secular themes that are going to increasingly impact companies, markets, society, the world. And as such, we need to be excellent at them, right? Because if you told me anything else was going to be a dominant economic trend of the next few decades, we'd say, well, we gotta get really good at that. And we had lots of expertise around the firm, but the goal was to really accelerate and coalesce that, because we want to be the best in the world at this, as we would with anything else we think is really important. So our job as SFG is to do 3 things: deepen our expertise in the actual content of this, right? You actually have to know stuff. In some cases, we have brilliant colleagues that have figured this out. We just need to find them. In some cases, bring them together. In other cases, we have to go build this ourselves. 2 is capabilities. You can't just know stuff. You have to be able to do stuff. So once you have the knowledge, how do you have product services? So, you know, if you want to think about climate transition, how do you create a financing instrument tied to that? So with the Italian utility Enel, we've created a form of a bond where they commit to getting to 55% of their power being renewable by the end of 2021, or they pay a big financial penalty, right? So how do we create new tools that are aligned with this, right? And then finally, how do we actually deliver that to clients? So it's not a theory, it's not an idea, it's not sitting collecting dust on a shelf, but actually help people navigate this complexity. And so there are 9 of us that sit in the executive office doing this, keeping fairly busy, as Waverly can attest. But then we have dedicated groups of the senior leaders within each of our divisions that we work with to ultimately drive it into each of the businesses. And so that's my strange random path to doing what I do. I never would have imagined really any of it, right? And a little bit back to career advice. I think the couple tips I would give that I would extract from mine is, number one, don't take any specific lessons from my journey because it's just too strange to be relevant. 2, in any role or experience, the chance to encounter reality in its messiness and its complexity and have to navigate to the other side is tremendously valuable. This is a field that's new and that is complex. The world is complex and changing. And to navigate that, it's not about what course did you take. It's can you make decisions amidst uncertainty? Can you bridge different ideas and perspectives? Because in this field, boy, are there a lot of different perspectives and ideas, right? It's those things that make you strong, capable, and able to succeed in these fields. And so I think cultivating that, and I think finally, you know, be open to listening to the world from time to time. You know, at each point, most of my key career steps weren't me proactively seeking out and mapping things out, partially because I'm not as organized and focused and driven as you are. I've been constantly impressed by, you know, maybe it's I was lazy or my generation was lazy, but just the folks today your age and their organization, their focus, their drive, their energy, their, you know, their expertise is just shockingly good. But I think also be open to when opportunities arise that may not feel like they're on your plan, right? Listen when the world sometimes says, hey, here's a chance to kind of dive in. I think those are the things I would kind of take from my past. So that was a long, modestly coherent ramble, but I'll sort of pause there. And so can answer any questions on that, or can we move on to the next question?
Thanks so much, John. I think you definitely give my generation a bit too much credit. We're pretty lazy as well when it comes to it, but great to get an insight into your career there and the history of Imprint Capital as well as SFG. And definitely very encouraging for us to kind of realize that, you know, it doesn't really matter what major or what course you've done. You can get there if you try hard enough. So for my next question, as John and Waverly already know, just last week, Goldman Sachs announced that it is partnering with a number of the world's largest financial institutions, including JP Morgan Chase, Bank of Ireland, and Wells Fargo, to launch the Centre for Climate Aligned Finance. And the aim of this centre is to serve as a hub for the cross-sector collaboration, bringing traditional financial instruments to innovative ideas to decarbonise the planet. So this means that collaboration will not necessarily be the responsibility of one country or one sector, which is great. And I suppose considering this collaboration, be it with competitors or with institutions, what are the attributes of good partnerships? And have you had partnerships that fail, and why? And I guess as well, how have you managed to overcome these?
It's a great question. I'll maybe say a few things, and Waverly, you chime in. I think, you know, as we look at it, it's funny, even when we talk broadly about our corporate purpose, right? You know, we talk about our purpose, we talk about these 2 themes, but we say we have 3 tools. So tool number 1 is what we can do with our business, right? Which is either innovating new financial instruments, like, you know, we worked with the EBRD to create climate resilience bond principles and issue the first climate resilience bond. So what can we do with our business, either innovating for tomorrow or scaling today? But then there's what we do by how we do business, our own organization, how we operate. But then that also gives us insight into what we can't do on our own, right? And in some cases, we need policy. So we've come out very, you know, vocally in terms of the need for a carbon price, for example, both with our research and our advocacy politically, but also where there are technical challenges. So, you know, this is the center is a great example where to really figure out, some sectors are relatively easy. The cost to come up with lower carbon solutions in some sectors works really well. Like we've sort of crossed the tipping point for large chunks of renewable power, for example. We're moving that way on batteries. Other things, cement, steel, transportation, we're not there yet, right? And ultimately it's going to take policy, it may take tax, it may take subsidy, it may take regulation, it may take innovation. It's going to take all of those tools. And when we look at that, if we take that challenge seriously, there are sort of three options. We try to do it ourselves. That's not going to work. We ignore it. That's not a particularly viable solution. Or we come up with another option, which tends to be collaboration. So, I mean, we've had lots of examples. I'll give a couple examples of collaboration that I think have been effective, and I'll give examples or some models of where it may be less successful. I think, one example that I would say was really successful is actually the Global Impact Investing Network. So we were there way back at the beginning when even the term impact investing was invented. I mean, it was really created to deliberately separate the historical, more negative screening, what are we not doing, which we called values-based investing, to, well, what are we doing? Impact investing, what's the impact we're trying to have? And it was this interesting effort where there was a set of stakeholders from a pretty wide variety of perspectives that had this common recognition of, it wasn't that there wasn't a role for the negative screening, but number one, a lot of the world, frankly, had soured on that. It seemed old, it seemed not institutional strength, it seemed like it couldn't scale, and people got frustrated with the limitations of what you could accomplish in the world through avoidance. And so there's a real common perspective of there's a new wave of activity around using capital in business in a positive way, but how do we grow that? And I think, what GIN ultimately ended up doing is it really helped coalesce around a term and frankly spent a lot of grant money. The Rockefeller Foundation put $25 million of grant money to sort of spread and promote that term, which is now almost a household term. And I think it's important to remember that was basically invented by a small number of people 12 years ago, right? And so a coalition of people from around the world coming together to say, we, number one, need a branding pivot from something that's perceived as sort of old to something new. We need to be able to look with new eyes. And number two, we are looking at new things. And so there's sort of these two layers. And I think just having seen that unfold, I think it was very, very effective in that lens. I mean, we engage in partnerships all the time. I mean, and we do a lot of that with clients. I think, working with, a European pension fund that wanted to invest its pension to generate the returns needed to meet its retirement obligations, but also wanted to drive measurable impacts on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's not simple, and it's not obvious, not like, here, invest in this product, but working together to create something for them. And I think often our best learning is a collaboration with one or more clients. And I think often when I see collaborations work, it's when you have a common view of what you're trying to accomplish. And everybody kind of knows why everyone's around the table, right? There's only text, there's no subtext. And that ultimately, I'm slightly biased, but I think collaborations that are put together from common perspective. And then I think ideally what gets built around that are two things. Sets of relationships that are resilient, constructive, and trust-based over time. That may resonate, for example, with your organization. But I think I found constantly through all of my time this ability to go back to a set of colleagues that I've built relationship with. We know we have some common assumptions, even though we may do very different things, that the persistence of those relationships over time are a form of liquidity in this whole market. Right? It makes it easier to figure things out, to solve problems, to identify things. Two is when those partnerships can also identify concrete things you can do, and they don't always have to. It may not always be as mercenary as we're going to get things A, B, and C done, right? But you at least need enough commonality of what you're trying to achieve, which may be a varying level of specificity. It allows you to build trust and relationships, and to the degree that there are things to get done, get them done. I think where things don't work out, sometimes partnerships are built where the biggest common denominator is excitement about the idea of a partnership versus anything you're actually trying to do. I like to say it's solving for the press release, where people are really excited to have an announcement. Partnerships that are about announcements, occasionally it's important to sort of put a stamp on something in the world, but generally it tends to be more self-referential in the interest of the parties that are involved. And so I think those are the areas that I've seen get less done. And often sometimes what happens, I've seen this in impact investing where people will work to create a new collaborative investment structure. And part of what people get so excited about is announcing all the names that are going to be around. And so by the time they design something that meets all the needs of the names they want on the press release, the market need has changed. And so the thing they've spent years creating is no longer relevant, right? And so I guess in some ways, solving for common perspective, need, and objective, great, right? Solving for something that seems like a good idea or a label or an announcement, less so. I don't know, Waverly, what else you would kind of chime in on?
Yeah, no, I think that was really, like, I completely agree with basically everything you said, as per usual. But I think I'll just add 2 points, maybe more focusing on SFG and kind of internally the partnerships that we have, which is, if you think about our team, we sit in the executive office of Goldman, which allows us to work across the various divisions of the firm. So we work with our investment banking colleagues and their clients. We work with our asset management division and their clients. And so this really speaks to kind of John's point of, like, we do partnerships all the time. Like, I think what's really core about our group is that one of our core purposes is partnership with the various divisions. And so this just really allows us to be so much more effective in our work with clients. It allows us to get so much more leverage in our knowledge, our expertise, and kind of those 3 things John was saying, our knowledge, our capabilities, and our delivery. And so through, as John mentioned earlier, we have these divisional councils, which are led by like 10 to 15 senior leaders across each of our divisions. And so our team works very, very closely with those councils in order to implement various things across sustainable finance. And so that's, like, I think, a really amazing example of a great partnership that started with just one division and now has expanded to all of them, which not only allows our team to get so much more leverage in the work that we're doing every day. As John mentioned, we're only 9 people. And so having these councils, I think, has been so integral into being able to just do more with our clients, being able to build division specific expertise and leverage people that have, like, financial knowledge about super niche things that our team probably couldn't get as up to speed as they already are. So providing a model that allows people to sit in their same seats, but really just leverage their existing knowledge in a new way and, you know, bring this unique perspective. And then I'll just say, on, like, kind of touching upon the bad partnerships, I think the reason that, and John mentioned this as well, in my perspective, the reason why certain partnerships fail is, I think that there are situations where it tends to be one-sided. Like, one party is gaining more than the other party. One side is more invested than the other side. And so, I mean, bringing it back to, like, a college example, like, it's like a group project and you're the person that's doing all of the work and the other person, like, reaps the benefits of you doing all the work. But that's not a genuine partnership where both parties are benefiting or contributing equally. And so I think, you know, just to reiterate what John was saying, like, those are really the key things that matter and make partnerships so important. And I think that with an issue as big as sustainable finance, climate change, gender equality, like, these are massive issues that fundamentally partnerships are going to be important to solving them.
No, and I think that last point, I think, is essential. Like, these are really hard, complex problems that touch, you know, every sector. And I think what's really critical is to sort of understand the percent that can be done alone is not large. Now, we all need to do justice to our piece, right? So our element, we want to be as excellent at our piece of that puzzle as we can, but we're all entirely dependent on other puzzle pieces, right? And I think part of that is clarity of, like, what do we bring? Like, for our group, you know, and it's funny, I mean, Waverly, you were around with some of the conversations with our colleagues who were nervous, like, what if we succeed in having our colleagues around the firm get excellent at this? What are we going to do, right? And I think the reality is, like, our job is to constantly get better at what we do so they can do what they do and it all fits together. And the same thing with external organizations, right? I think to sort of understand what you bring, understand what you want, and then find a way to make things real and concrete relatively quickly. I'm just thinking of an example from this morning. So we're talking to a lot of the folks in our global markets division about climate risk and different tools to evaluate and understand climate risk and Paris alignment in investment portfolios. And we've done a tremendous amount of research on the technical side, but today's focus in terms of partnering with them on how do we find real live portfolios or clients where we can apply this, see how it goes, and then figure out what we do, right? Because in some ways it's feeding the relationship, like giving the partnership stuff to do that you can then all reflect on, iterate, adapt, and extend. Because I think the other thing we found is these very long, ambitious things where it's kind of hard to know if you're on track. Are we getting anywhere? Do we have those chances to iterate, to reflect? And so I found, especially with solving new problems, this idea of design thinking is really critical. This ability to kind of prototype, model, iterate, and evolve is really critical. And in partnerships, it can be really helpful because you may realize we know what brings us together. We kind of know where we want to get, but we're not quite sure what path it's going to take to get us there.
That's great. Thanks so much, John and Waverly, for those contributions. Definitely interesting to hear your perspectives on different sorts of partnerships and successful and unsuccessful ones. So I think I'll try and move on to my next question now. I suppose so. Recent events, including the coronavirus pandemic and Black Lives Matter movements, have brought about major economic and social changes. The US has briefly expanded the social safety net, and the UK has underwritten much of the private sector, and Ireland has nationalised the healthcare system. Thinking of this, thinking of the climate transition and the expression, never let a good crisis go to waste, are there any opportunities to transform our economic model or society in terms of climate?
I think you probably know the answer to that on our end, but I don't know, Waverly, do you want to start and then I'll elaborate?
Yeah, I can start. I think, I think this moment, and I actually love that quote, never let a good crisis go to waste, because I think this moment is so important in really evaluating how we got to this point and what we can do to change going forward. And I think that COVID, as a separate issue, not even speaking to Black Lives Matter movement, I think COVID specifically was just such a shock to so many people and a shock to our system. And now, I don't know if you guys have been following, the US approach to COVID has just been so atrocious. And so I think it's just overall, just bringing so much awareness and emphasis to issues that I think people always knew were there, but weren't getting the urgency and attention that it needed, like the US healthcare system or our educational system or racism in the US. And so I think that a lot of people are actually very optimistic that this moment will be used to affect real change and address the gaps in our system as it stands. And I think specifically relating that to ESG, I think that there's an amazing opportunity to leverage the work that our team has been doing and expand it even into areas that we weren't necessarily addressing, like racism. So John was mentioning before, we have these two pillars, climate transition and inclusive growth. And how do we use our platform at Goldman to address the Black Lives Matter movement, to advance that mission, to help support our people internally, to come up with commercial solutions that support Black communities? All of those things now are being put into the forefront of people's minds, of senior leadership at Goldman and other firms in governments and nonprofits, really everywhere. And so I think that I don't think that this crisis will go to waste. I am actually very optimistic that this time will be different, because I think that there will just be such major consequences, if not. And I also think that coming out of this crisis, there will be a lot of opportunity to, I guess the saying is build back better, of investing in renewable energy, doing things differently so that we don't have something like this happen again. I think, just the urgency of doing that is just so top of mind for people.
Yeah, I would add, I think they're kind of specific things and general things, right? I think, let me start on the general and I'll get to the specific. Someone, a big investor told me the other day, if there were ever a way to remind people that sort of non-financial analysis and non-financial factors matter tremendously, if this didn't do it, nothing will, right? And whether it's resilience, whether it's leadership, whether it's all of these things. I mean, no one's climate stress test included oil prices at negative $38 a barrel, right? You know, we've seen how fast, how dramatically things can change. We've seen how differences of how people are positioned in terms of resilience and how well managed they are in terms of adjusting is just tremendously important. We've also found in some ways, I mean, think about in particularly, you know, racism in the US. You know, if you think about the sort of ability to have hard conversations, be vulnerable, to really challenge something so important and so challenging, and frankly, where we've made so little progress, you know, it is profoundly important in its own right. But by the way, any of the progress one makes on that is going to be useful across anything else you want to tackle, right? In some ways, all the things we do, if you can solve hard problems, you can solve easy problems, right? And I think this motivation, this imperative of we have to solve these hard problems, and then the easier problems are going to get a whole lot easier. And I think that's an important kind of broad lens. So A, sort of resilience, governance, non-financial things matter. B, let's build the skill sets to deal with hard problems, because then everything else is going to be easy. And we see this play out in some very specific forms. And, you know, clean energy is a great example where coming out of the great financial crisis, you know, clean energy looked risky. Now it's the opposite. It looks safe, right? You think about infrastructure investments. It used to feel safe investing in things like airports and toll roads. And now renewable power looks like a pretty amazing bet. We're seeing the art of what's possible, and I think it's inspiring and motivating people to change and to move. And I think there was this question in the middle of the crisis, is that going to be an excuse to slow down? And I think that's certainly not what we're seeing people doing. And I think that part is inspiring. It still is going to take a lot of work, right? I think this is the thing in all of these things is there's almost this division of labor in all of this, which is you have activists winning hearts and minds. You've got policymakers doing their part, and then you need the private sector. And like we all, at the end of the day, need to execute. And I think this is one of the things that sometimes gets left out. And I think this is back to when Imprint Capital started. Our resolution is we are going to figure out if this is not. And we wanted to avoid what we called a false negative, which is if we failed, if our portfolios failed, if our clients weren't successful, if we want to be because actually this was a bad idea, not because we just didn't do our job well, right? And I think this is this moment of executing as excellent as we can is the way to figure out these hard problems. Are they solvable, you know, with these tools? Do we need to change things? But I think kind of coming out of this, the other big thing that stood out when we think about climate, when we, you know, when our board approved our target, we announced, our CEO announced last December of $750 billion of sustainable finance. It was interesting, a couple of board members said, this is great, you know, we love this, but by the way, most of it's going to be on climate, you know, inclusive growth, that's fine, that's important, but, you know, we know most of this can be on climate. Now, as we've underwritten, I think, $30 billion of COVID relief bonds, and as we find ourselves kind of one pandemic and race-based crisis in the US later, confronting, you know, where we are as a country in a way I think we haven't, you know, the importance of both of these pieces, I think, is becoming increasingly apparent to everyone. And so I think that I'm encouraged by the fact that people are connecting the dots a little bit, that all these things that have seemed abstract, ESG, resilience, sustainability, it's like, oh yeah, that does matter. The world is a vulnerable place, and navigating it well is important. And risks that seem very abstract can kind of show up really, really fast. I think those lessons, I think, will persist.
Just one quick thing I would add to John's last point is that I think that this moment has also underscored kind of the interplay and integration of E, S, and G. I think that, as John said, like a lot of people really weren't paying attention to S or didn't fully understand what social issues were, or felt that they were just like less clear to navigate versus governance or environmental issues. And I think in this moment with COVID, it's really underscored that environmental issues are social issues. Social issues matter. They can have a very severe impact, and that companies really need to address them, but not in silos, right? Like they have to address ESG in this complete and holistic approach. And I think we've even seen this, as John mentioned, we have this $750 billion target, and we in the past few months we've been tracking various commercial activities across Goldman towards the target, and we've seen that actually the majority of our activity fits in this multi-theme category that really cuts across climate and inclusive growth. And so I think that this moment just really underscores, you know, that all of these issues kind of intersect and interplay with each other, and that, you know, climate change is not just an environmental issue, but it's also a social issue.
Thanks so much, John and Waverly. Definitely some food for thought there, and I'm kind of encouraged. I feel like you're slightly more positive towards the future, so hopefully there's good things to come. I'm conscious of your time now. I think we only have maybe 5 minutes left, but if I could just ask you a quick question on impact investing, if that's okay. So can you speak to your work in impact investing and sustainable finance more broadly? How do you think this approach will impact us all, and what are the long-range issues or opportunities that you think emerging leaders should be aware of when considering the future of impact investing on on financial services and society more broadly?
John, do you want to start? Is he here? Did we lose him? Maybe we lost him. Okay, I can start. Yeah, I can cover this one. I think on impact investing broadly, our work has been, I think it's been way more diverse and broad than I initially anticipated, because I think before I joined SFG, I kind of was thinking of sustainable finance and ESG solely through this lens of E and environmental issues, climate change, clean energy, etc. And I think, especially highlighted by, you know, the previous question and comments around COVID, is the importance of actually really directing capital and market and commercial solutions to issues in healthcare, investing in communities, investing in education. And so John mentioned earlier, we have kind of like we have 2 overarching themes and then 9 sub-themes beneath them. And so in climate transition, it's clean energy, waste and materials, ecosystem services, sustainable transport. But we have this full inclusive growth pillar. And so I think that while most people may perceive impact investing through the lens of E and environment and clean energy, and of course, like, that's been super, super top of mind. And John always has this quote of, if E was in the driver's seat, now S is like in the passenger seat where they were in the back seat before. And so I think as you think about going forward, it'll really be investing in communities and healthcare and education, in people. And I think, kind of reiterating my last point around environmental issues, I think there will be much more of a lens of the impact of environmental issues on people and not just the planet.
Thanks so much, Waverly. I suppose I don't really know where John's gone, but that kind of really wraps it up for our call today. I'd just like to say thank you so much, and it would have been really lovely to speak to you in person. I know a lot of other people had sent me messages about questions, but unfortunately we didn't have enough time. So hopefully we'll get to speak to you in the future. And as they say in Irish, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. It was great to meet you all.
Thanks so much, Waverly.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys.
Oh, hey John, you timed your exit there perfectly for Waverly to take the hard last question.
Oh, great. No, so sorry, the power just went out here. And so I had to go and we have hidden in a cabinet. Most of the people on this won't even know what this is. It's a phone that you plug into the wall, and it has a cord, so everything else is wireless, all the electronics. So I had to scramble to find this to dial back in. So apologies, I disappeared.
Well, look, we really appreciate your time, John, and Waverly's as well. Hopefully the power returns sooner rather than later, but a real privilege to hear about your work. And yeah, like, as we were saying to Waverly, thank you for your insights, and when the world reopens, you're more than welcome. We look forward to hosting you in Ireland sometime soon.
Would love
Yes.
to.
SFG trip to Ireland.
Yeah, it's a research.
Exactly. Well, I had a memorable trip to Achill Island for a friend's wedding, and so keen to get back sometime. And look, the work you guys do as an organization is so important, and so much about the building relationships and connection and bridging disciplines is so important. And just excited to get a chance to share our experience and look forward to if there are ways we can be helpful going forward.
Great. Thanks so much. We'll
Cheers
see you
all.
guys
Thanks so much,
soon.
John and Waverly.
Thank you.